Let's talk about gender, sexual orientation, and how those two things are different, and a reminder of how gender and sex are different. And whenever I talk about these things on the YouTube, I do often get comments from folks not necessarily enrolled in the class. So I'm just going to let you know, if you're one of those folks joining and you have very strong opinions about sex, gender identity, sexual orientation. If you ask genuine questions trying to clarify terms or perhaps get more information, I'll answer your questions. But if you just yell, I know you're typing, but the typing equivalent of yelling or just insulting me, I'm not going to answer that. I will answer if it's, you're generally trying to learn more. All right, so let's start with, first of all, I've covered this previously, but sex and gender are two different things. You have biological sex, which can be male or female or intersex. And this is in your textbook because sometimes students will push back and be like, don't push your agenda on me. This is in the textbook, all right? I am telling you stuff that's in the textbook. It's in many textbooks. It's pretty, it's standard fare. It's what's known about biology, all right? So this is not just coming from me. I'm calling your attention to this. All right, so intersex. There are lots of different causes for intersex, but someone who is identified as intersex, they have atypical sexual development. So they don't neatly fit into the category of male or female, or they might lean towards male or female features, but they are atypical in some way in their development. And this could be from exposure to hormones, genetic conditions, like recessive gene conditions, chromosomal abnormalities. There are lots of specific causes for someone to be born intersex. All right. So that's sex. And then you've got gender. Gender is an identity. You have a gender identity with whether you identify as a man or a woman or a non-binary individual. And some people will use the term agender. We're evolving as we start to recognize which people exist when we start to offer certain options on our surveys and in our interviews when we do research. And you may be familiar with the idea that you can have transgender or cisgender men and women. So if you are cisgender, your gender agrees with the sex you were assigned at birth. So a cisgender man you identify as a man and you were assigned male at birth. A cisgender woman they identify as a woman and they were assigned female at birth. A transgender man was assigned female at birth. They identify as male. Transgender woman, assigned male at birth, they identify as a woman. All right. If you have a transgender individual, how do you know who they're attracted to? How do you know their sexual orientation? Sexual orientation has to do with your preference in what type of people you're attracted to. So, first of all, nothing about gender identity tells you about someone's sexual orientation. They are completely separate. If someone is, say, a trans woman, are they attracted to men? Are they attracted to women? You have no idea. Unless they tell you, you do not know. Those things do not correspond. There is nothing about those two things that are going to overlap, that they're going to give you any clues about the other. All right, some other issues with talking about sexual orientation. Okay, you're probably familiar with the terms, or you at least have heard the terms heterosexual and homosexual. Hetero meaning different, homo being same. The idea with heterosexual is you're attracted to the opposite sex. If you're homosexual, you're attracted to the same sex. Seems simple and straightforward, right? All right, there are various issues. First of all, many people are bisexual or pansexual. What is pansexual? Pansexual orientation is an orientation where you don't care what someone has for genitals or what their gender identity is. You're attracted to the person. You're not attracted to their gender. You're not attracted to their genitals. You just basically are attracted to or fall in love with the person. You acknowledge intersex people. Like, hey, intersex, not a problem. Oh, trans? Cool, not a problem. I like you as a person. That's what I am attracted to. So if you don't care, if you have no preferences, you don't care if someone's intersex, basically you don't care what someone's sex is, you don't care what their gender is, and you don't care if they're cis or trans, you're attracted to the person, you are pansexual. And there are other terms that have been identified too, like omnisexual. These are people that, same basic idea, but they have some preferences. At least that is my understanding as a cisgender woman who's been doing my best to keep up and learn so that I can have respectful descriptions of all the students I might get in my classes. And so that is one issue, that you're not just heterosexual or homosexual. You might have also heard that sexuality exists on a spectrum. Many people, even if you identify as hetero or homosexual, many people, it's more accurate to say they are strongly heterosexually leaning or strongly homosexually leaning. We do find research with interviews, with surveys, and also with biological, physiological measurement of arousal, we'll see lots of evidence that many people have more diversity in their attractions than they can even be aware of or admit to, because, social stigma and stuff like that can also contribute. And so many people have argued that talking about sexuality in dichotomous terms, like saying, are you heterosexual or homosexual, using terms like same-sex relationships, that they can really create a false dichotomy. Remember, we've used this term before. That's when you make it sound like there are two options or two categories for something when it's really way more diverse than that. And in this case, there's a lot of evidence for diversity. And so many researchers have found that rather than categories, you learn a lot more about people and relationships and attraction, including sexual attraction, if you use a continuum approach. So a categorical approach puts labels on people. A continuum approach measures the amount of something, like the amount of attraction you have for particular types of people. So a continuum approach seems more appropriate, and it's starting to be applied more often in research. Still, we have definite limitations in research in this area. The vast majority of research on relationships has been very limited and has focused on couples who are in traditional heterosexual relationships. That's how they would label it. That it is cisgender man, cisgender woman with a strong heterosexual, or that's how they would label themselves. We don't have nearly as much information on those who identify as bi or pan, or we haven't asked questions in such a way to see, okay, that person who says they're heterosexual, how much of their attractions lean in that direction versus, they may actually have some same-sex attractions, but since they have mostly opposite, so there are definite issues, and then probably with terminology there may need to be some adjustments. Now, another thing I do want to mention is that, and I know I've mentioned this in my developmental psychology class. I don't remember if I mentioned it in the social psychology videos. I always like to acknowledge bi erasure. When we talk about individuals who are gay or lesbian, we often make it seem like there's the false dichotomy. There are two. Most people with a sexual minority status in terms of sexual identity, sexual orientation, most people, the largest category out of LGB in the LGBTQ plus community, the largest number is bisexual. But we often completely ignore them and, again, create a false dichotomy and say, okay, which version are you, gay or lesbian? And when people get married, then we act like they've chosen a team, it's settled. Okay, now we know who you're really attracted to. If you are bisexual and you marry a man, that doesn't mean you stop being attracted to women, all right? Or vice versa. And then, again, some people are pansexual. They're like, hey, I'm attracted to all sorts of folks, even if I married this one particular individual. All right, so there are some other general differences that have been noticed in terms of sex differences in relationships, and I'm going to do that as a separate video.